They say history began with us, with the rise of civilization, the birth of cities, and the spark of written language. They say we are the first species to dream, to build, to shape the earth in our image. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the real beginning came not with Homo sapiens, but with someone far older, far more mysterious? 2 million years ago, before the pyramids, before language, before even memory as we know it, there walked a creature who stood upright, held fire in his hands, and stared into the unknown. He did not write books or build temples. He left behind no name. And yet, he endured longer than any human species ever would. He crossed deserts and mountains without a compass. He hunted under the sun with no weapons but persistence. He was not quite beast, not quite man, but something in between. And in that space between, something extraordinary happened. A spark, a beginning, a mind learning to imagine, a body learning to endure, a species on the edge of transformation. We rarely speak his name. We often forget he existed. But the truth is, everything we are began with him. His name was Homo erectus, and this is his story. Not a story of survival alone, but of legacy. Of the first to shape stone, to carry fire, to leave the land he was born into and step into the unknown. This isn't just a story of bones and fossils. It's the story of the human journey before we even knew what human meant. And perhaps the most important story we've never told. Because before it was us, it was him. Chapter 1. The spark in the wilderness, thousands of years before the idea of history was born, before ink touched parchment, or wheels rolled over roads. There was silence. No monuments, no names, no songs carved into stone. Just the wind moving through tall grass, the crackle of a distant fire, and the footsteps of a creature that walked upright under the African sun. He didn't know he was writing the first chapter of humanity. He didn't even know what human meant. And yet, with each step, with each breath, he was shaping what we would one day become. He was not like the animals around him. His arms were not made for running, his teeth not for tearing flesh like a lion's. But he had something they didn't, a secret weapon that no one could see. Endurance, curiosity, and a mind that was slowly, silently waking up. He was Homo erectus, the upright man, but the name came much later, long after his bones had turned to stone. To himself, he was nothing. No language, no sense of identity as we understand it. And yet, something inside him was changing. His brain was growing, larger than his ancestors, more complex. He was no longer reacting to the world. He was starting to think about it, to make decisions not just from instinct, but from understanding. This was not an accident. It was the result of something profound. Evolution shaped by fire, by hunger, by the raw violence and beauty of survival. Imagine standing with him. The sun is brutal, the land dry and open. Danger lurks in every shadow, lions, hyenas, snakes, but he doesn't run. He walks upright, confident, patient, because walking is his power. He can go where others cannot. He can cross savannas, climb hills, move through territory too vast for most animals to survive. His legs are long, his hips narrow, his feet surprisingly modern. He is not clumsy like those before him. He is built for distance, for time, for the slow pursuit of something greater than the moment. When he hunts, he doesn't leap. He follows. For hours, sometimes days. While faster animals overheat and collapse, he keeps going. Not with claws or speed, but with sweat. Sweat cools his body. It's his armor, his adaptation, his silent evolution. And when the antelope finally stumbles in the heat, when the lion gives up the chase, Homo erectus moves in. He is not just surviving nature, he is learning how to use it. Around him, the world is brutal. Droughts kill, predators roam, the land itself shifts beneath his feet. But he adapts. He learns. His hands begin to shape stone, not by accident, but with intention. At first, it's simple. Sharp edges for cutting meat, breaking bone, scraping hides. But soon, patterns emerge. The tools become symmetrical, refined, more than just useful. They are consistent, passed down, repeated. These are not random acts. They are tradition in its earliest form. And yet, Homo erectus does not speak as we do. He has no words for what he's doing, no names for the animals he tracks or the tools he crafts. But meaning does not require language. He communicates with motion, with sound, with shared experience. When a young member of his group watches him strike stone against stone, learning begins. Not in a classroom, not with instruction, but through observation, through repetition, through survival. His world is one of constant challenge. The group must move often, following water, tracking prey, avoiding danger. But with each migration, they learn more. They remember. Not just places, but strategies. Where the fruit trees grow, where the predators wait. The world is becoming a map, not written, but lived. And in this living memory, something new is born. Culture. Not art, not religion, not yet. But shared knowledge. A thread connecting past to present. The evidence is in the bones, in the fossils of those who lived through injury, who were cared for rather than abandoned. In the campsites that were returned to again and again. In the ashes of ancient fires. Homo erectus did not build monuments, but he left behind clues, traces of a mind learning to imagine the future. His story isn't just about survival. It's about the first flicker of identity, of becoming something more. And though he would never know it, he was laying the foundation for everything that would come after. For language, for community, for memory. He was not a beast. He was not fully human. He was the bridge, the beginning, the spark in the wilderness. Chapter 2. Fire and Flesh. It began perhaps with a flash in the sky. A storm cracking across the plains, a tree struck and set ablaze, flames licking the earth while every animal ran. But not him. Homo erectus did not run. He watched, from a distance at first, cautious, uncertain, then closer, hesitant steps toward the thing that terrified all others. Fire. For the first time in history, a living creature approached it not as a threat, but as a tool. And that single moment may have changed everything. Because fire was not just warmth or light, it was transformation. And Homo erectus would learn how to use it. The oldest evidence is debated. Some scientists point to sites in East Africa where charred bones and blackened earth suggest controlled fire over 1 million years ago. Others remain cautious. But the pattern is clear. By the time Homo erectus had spread across continents, fire followed him. In Israel, in China, in Java, ashes speak where words do not. Controlled fire, not natural disaster. Repeated, protected, carried. This was no accident. It was tradition. Fire gave him warmth during cold nights. It kept predators at bay when the sun disappeared. But more than that, fire changed his body. With fire came cooking, and with cooking came nutrition. Raw meat is hard to chew, harder to digest. Cooking made it easier. More calories, more energy, more time. Time to think, to rest, to plan. Fire reshaped not just how he lived, but how he evolved. Smaller guts, bigger brains, less chewing, more talking. And it didn't end with the stomach. Fire brought people together. Around its glow, the night was no longer empty. Shadows danced, eyes reflected orange in the dark. The group huddled close, not out of fear, but connection. And in those shared hours, something else was born. Memory, bonding, even the first seeds of story. Not spoken with language, perhaps, but felt in sound, in gesture, in rhythm. Around the fire, culture took root. But Homo erectus was not only a fire carrier, he was a traveler. Unlike any creature before him, he moved beyond borders. From Africa to Eurasia, from forests to savannas, he walked, and walked, and walked. His footprints crossed landscapes that would take modern armies months to traverse. He was not migrating. He was expanding. He followed game, water, weather. But maybe he also followed curiosity. Each new land brought challenges, colder temperatures, strange animals, unknown terrain. But he adapted. He built shelter from branches, used fire for warmth, adjusted his hunting style. Where others died, he survived. He was not tied to one ecosystem. He made the world his home. And that required more than strength. It required knowledge. He passed that knowledge down, not in books or drawings, but in action, in demonstration. Children watched the skilled shape tools. Youth followed elders during hunts. The injured were not left behind. They were cared for, federal, protected. This required memory, empathy, intention. It required something human, and still, he changed. His tools became more refined. The Acheulean hand axe found across continents was not a random creation. It was standardized, balanced, often beautiful in its symmetry. More than just a weapon, it may have been a symbol, a way to show skill, a lesson, a legacy. In this slow, powerful evolution, Homo erectus was building the foundations of everything that would come. Not in leaps, but in footsteps, in firelight, in silence. His was a world without language, yet filled with meaning. A world without art, yet shaped by imagination. And through it all, he endured. Chapter 3. The Mind Before Us. We often imagine intelligence as our own reflection, the way we reason, speak, invent, create. But what if the first sparks of that intelligence didn't come from Homo sapiens at all? What if they began in a mind that never wrote a word, never built a city, and never knew it was laying the foundation for something greater? To understand who we are, we have to look back, not just at our beginnings, but at the mind that came before, the mind of Homo erectus. He didn't think in language. He had no words for memory, no grammar to hold thoughts in place. But his brain was growing, more than any hominin before him. From just over 600 cubic centimeters to more than 1,200 in some individuals, Homo erectus carried the earliest signs of what we now call thought. Not just instinct, not just reaction, but planning, intention, awareness. His brain was not yet ours, but it was moving in that direction. Inside that expanding skull, the prefrontal cortex was taking shape, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, decision-making, and understanding time. The Broca's area, tied to speech, was developing too. The architecture of communication was forming, even if words had not yet arrived. What did he think about? We can't know, but we can see the results. In the shape of tools, in the mastery of fire, in the way he moved across continents and adapted to every challenge. These are not the actions of a creature bound by instinct alone. These are signs of a conscious mind. His tools speak volumes. Acheulean hand axes, crafted with care, shaped with symmetry, sometimes discarded unused, are found across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Their design remained consistent for over 1 million years. That kind of technological stability doesn't come from trial and error alone. It comes from teaching, from memory, from an idea being passed down across generations, not carved into tablets, but carried in minds. A culture of cognition before culture had a name. And then there's the shell. On the Indonesian island of Java, archaeologists found a mussel shell over 400,000 years old, etched with a zigzag pattern. Not a tool, not a container, just a pattern, abstract, intentional, without function. Perhaps it meant nothing, or perhaps it meant everything. Because if Homo erectus made that engraving, it would be the oldest known example of symbolic thought. A moment when a mind reached beyond survival, beyond need, and created something simply to express. That is the true measure of intelligence. Not just solving problems, but imagining something that doesn't yet exist. Homo erectus may not have spoken as we do, but he likely had ways of sharing meaning. A system of grunts, gestures, rhythms, communication born not from syntax, but from connection. If danger approached, he warned. If food was found, he signaled. If a child cried, he soothed. These are not words, but they are language in its earliest form. He lived in groups, not as a convenience, but as a necessity. There is fossil evidence of elderly individuals, those who had lost teeth, broken bones, survived injury. That survival implies care. The injured were not left behind. They were helped, fed, healed. That requires empathy. That requires memory. That requires time. In a world where everything fought to survive, Homo erectus made room for compassion, for patience, for learning. And learning meant childhood. As his brain grew, so did the time needed to develop it. Unlike most animals, Homo erectus children may have spent years learning to walk, to hunt, to understand the world around them. That means mothers, and likely others, invested time and energy into the young. They taught through action, through repetition, through presence. And in those long, quiet years of childhood, the future was shaped. His intelligence was not the kind that builds rockets or writes novels, but it was the kind that looks up at a mountain and wonders what lies beyond. It was the kind that sees a spark and learns to feed it. The kind that holds a stone and shapes it with vision and precision. Homo erectus didn't just survive his world, he changed it. One fire, one tool, one migration at a time. He understood his environment not in abstract theories, but in lived experience. He remembered watering holes. He tracked herds across open plains. He noticed the direction of the wind, the pattern of the stars, the shift in seasons. His intelligence was embodied, connected to his movement, his senses, his survival. He wasn't learning facts, he was learning life. And with each generation, those lessons grew. Not because someone told him what to do, but because someone showed him, and someone watched, and someone remembered. That is the essence of culture. Not monuments or myths, but the passing of knowledge through time. Before language, before art, before us. And still, we don't fully understand him. We know his tools. We've mapped his journey. We've studied the burn patterns of his ancient hearths, but we've never heard his voice, never seen his smile, never felt what it was like to think with his brain. And yet, his mind lives in us. When we wonder, when we explore, when we shape the world not just to survive in it, but to understand it, we are continuing a legacy that began with him. He was not the final version of humanity, but he was the prototype, the experiment, the first spark of something extraordinary. And perhaps that's what makes him most human. Not his tools, not his fire, but the fact that he tried, that he failed, that he endured, that he learned, and that he left something behind. Not carved in stone, but carried in memory, in blood, in thought. This was the mind of Homo erectus, not silent, not simple, but opening, becoming, evolving. The first glimmer of the vast, intricate consciousness that would one day build cities, send rockets to the moon, and ask where it all began. And if you follow that question back far enough, past the kings and caves, past the language and light, you'll find him, standing alone beneath the stars, looking forward, not knowing why, just wondering. Chapter 4. The Legacy of the First Walker. Before we wrote poems, we walked. Before we prayed, we wandered. Before we knew who we were, or even what we were, there was Homo erectus, moving through a world untouched by history, and yet making history with every step. He didn't call himself human. He had no name, no tribe, no gods. And yet, in so many ways, he was the first to begin the journey that would lead to all of us. He never saw a city, never heard music, never carved a monument or painted a cave. And yet, he did something more enduring. He learned to endure. Through fire and hunger, through shifting climate and new lands, he carried something forward, something no creature had carried before. Memory, learning, imagination. Not in the form of language, but in the form of behavior, in action, in legacy. His footprints are scattered across the globe, from the valleys of East Africa to the islands of Southeast Asia, not left with ceremony, but with necessity, with intention. And with every mile he traveled, the earth grew smaller. The species grew wiser. The future came a little closer. He did not know us, but we know him. Or at least we're starting to. In the tools he made, we see problem solving. In the fire he tamed, we see foresight. In the care he gave to the injured, we see empathy. And in the ashes of his hearths, we see the first embers of what would become human society. Homo erectus didn't build the world we live in, but he made it possible. He didn't write the story of mankind, but he set the stage. He was the first to look at the world not just as something to survive, but as something to change, to shape, to explore. His mind was not ours, but it held the seed of ours, and in that seed was potential, raw, silent, and unstoppable. 2 million years have passed since his journey began. Civilizations have risen and fallen. Empires have come and gone. We've reached the moon, split the atom, built machines that think and speak. But the roots of it all trace back to a creature who held no titles, no tools of gold, no words of wisdom, just a stone, a fire, a path, and the courage to walk it. We owe him more than a chapter in a textbook. We owe him recognition. Not as a beast, not as a curiosity, but as the one who dared to try. The first to wonder what lay beyond the next hill. The first to follow a question instead of a scent. The first to burn his hands for the promise of warmth. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a builder of futures. And so, as we stand today, facing our own trials in an age of climate shifts, artificial minds, and uncharted frontiers, we would do well to remember him, not with pity, not with distance, but with respect. Because he reminds us that greatness doesn't always come with words. Sometimes it walks in silence. Sometimes it runs under the sun. Sometimes it just keeps going, even when no one is watching. So look at your own hands, at the road ahead, at the flame that still burns in your chest. That is him, still alive, still walking. He walked first, so we could run. Chapter 5. The Last Horizon. The end did not come with a roar. There was no final battle, no sudden collapse, no single day when Homo erectus vanished from the earth. Instead, the end came as it always does in nature, slowly, imperceptibly, like dusk fading into night. The world around him was changing. The rains came and went with new rhythms. Forests shrank, ice expanded, animals migrated differently. Seasons grew harsher, less predictable. But he, the walker, kept going. For nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus endured where others did not. He outlasted predators, survived climate shifts, crossed lands few dared to enter. He had walked from Africa to Asia, from river valleys to mountain passes. Every footprint he left behind told a story of resilience and movement. He didn't rule the world, but he belonged to it more completely than any creature before him. Yet by the time the winds began to whisper of new minds, more complex, more curious, more capable, Homo erectus was nearing his twilight. Across distant lands, other hominins were rising: Homo heidelbergensis, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi, and eventually Homo sapiens. They would bring new ways of thinking, new strategies for survival. They would build shelters, carve symbols, speak names. But their roots were buried deep in the footsteps of the one who came before. Homo erectus never knew what he began. He didn't see the future, but he made it possible. He passed on more than genes. He passed on fire, tools, memory, movement. He shaped not just stones, but the way to survive across generations. Without language, he taught. Without art, he imagined. And without ever knowing the word legacy, he left one behind. Even in his final chapters, he continued to adapt. In parts of Southeast Asia, particularly on the island of Java, small populations of Homo erectus lived on for longer than once believed. Perhaps until as recently as 100,000 years ago. Long after other branches of humanity had appeared, he was still there, still crafting hand axes, still tending fires, alone, but enduring. A quiet echo of the beginning. His tools, once revolutionary, now seemed simple beside those of his descendants, but they were no less significant. Acheulean hand axes continued to appear, shaped with care, balanced in form, suggesting not just utility, but perhaps pride. His fires still burned in hearths scattered across ancient campsites, illuminating the night not only for warmth or safety, but for gathering. There is no fossil record of stories, yet in those moments, around flame, in shared silence, culture flickered. Homo erectus may not have witnessed art, but he practiced something just as rare: consistency across time. 1 million years of survival using knowledge passed hand to hand, gesture to gesture. That endurance required not just instinct, but memory. Not just adaptation, but intention. We often think of extinction as failure. But Homo erectus was no failure. He was an experiment that succeeded for longer than any human species before or since. His disappearance was not a defeat. It was a passing of the torch. He didn't vanish because he couldn't survive. He stepped aside because he had made survival itself a tradition, a skill, a lesson, and others had learned. Somewhere, perhaps in his last generation, one of them looked out across a barren plain, under a sky full of stars he did not name. He had no concept of species, of extinction, of legacy. He only knew hunger, warmth, movement, and danger. But within him lived 2 million years of choices, made in silence, carved into stone, passed from hand to hand. He would have watched the horizon, as his kind always did. The same curiosity that once led his ancestors to chase the sun beyond distant hills was still alive in him. He walked not because he knew what lay ahead, but because he needed to know. It was that simple and that profound. The world around him was no longer his alone. Others were coming. They carried fire differently. They thought in more intricate ways, but they walked because he had walked first. The earth he had crossed had become their home too. The rhythm he had set was still echoing. His kind would eventually disappear, quietly, without monuments or mourning. But the traces remained, in stone tools scattered across continents, in ancient hearths buried beneath layers of ash and soil, in the DNA carried by those who followed. And maybe if you listen closely, you can still hear him in us, in the urge to explore, in the instinct to endure, in the silent question we still ask when we look at the stars. What lies beyond? Because long before we could speak that question, he was already walking toward the answer.